All right, we're on the air. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Fitness Over 40. We got episode 2. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed the first one. I actually did have a few people reach out, and they said they liked it. They liked the flow of it. They liked it was a little different than what we were normally doing, a little less just kind of strict CrossFit stuff. So hopefully, we can bring that energy again. But as the title says, whatever you guys are seeing on YouTube right now or on Spotify, we're talking about resistance training and strength training, why it's important, why you should be focusing on it, or maybe that's what you're learning, why you should be focusing on it here. And we're going to talk about, resistance training versus other styles of training in a way, and kind of give you a roadmap to why, again, we think it should be the number one thing you're focusing on, or maybe it's not for a few people, but we're going to get into it and why you shouldn't be afraid of it. So, yeah, we're starting with what is strength training, what is resistance training, because some people might hear that and think, like I am doing that, and they're not. But when you Henry, when you think if someone were to tell you, hey, I'm doing resistance training, or you would say, hey, I'm going to give you resistance training, just in a nutshell version, or maybe a few sentences, what would you classify as resistance training?
Yeah, so I think again, in a nutshell, there's two sides to that, or two main characteristics. The main one is you need to be overcoming an external weight, and external in quotations, because technically a push-up is resistance training. Your body weight is creating resistance, and you're not using an external contraption.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that you're overcoming a resistance. But second, and kind of alluding to that point where you may think that you're doing it, but you're not, that resistance that you're overcoming needs to be challenging, right? It needs to feel at some point where like you almost weren't able to overcome it, or you were, and for more advanced people, you were intimidated before you started, to where you're like, ooh, like this is going to be tough, or I don't know if I can do that. So if you're asking yourself these kinds of questions, or you go through where you hit the next to last rep, and then you hit the final one, and you're like, man, going into that last one, it felt I didn't know if I was going to be able to do it. Right? It's like we're looking for that kind of dosing at least one time in every session. If you're doing that one time in every session, it's likely that you're challenging yourself enough in all the other pieces, because you kind of understand the dose that you're looking for.
So you mean like mechanically challenging? Because some people might be like, well, I'm doing 100 punches with a 2-pound dumbbell, and that's challenging, and it's a load. So like, what do you mean? What if someone were to say that, like, yeah, I do resistance training, I do kickboxing with some weights for 30 minutes. Not that I'm knocking that, I'm just saying, a versus.
Yeah. So again, if we look at point number one, you need to overcome that resistance, right? So you want at some point your ability to overcome it to be challenged. So if you're punching a dumbbell, it needs to come to that point where you almost weren't able to finish that punch. Right? That's kind of that would be like a lame example. Try to illustrate it in.
But it's a good example. Like, you couldn't achieve that. It would probably take a while to achieve that.
Exactly.
Like, and that wouldn't be super efficient or probably a good use of time.
Exactly. So if you're punching with the dumbbell and the challenge is that you're out of breath, that doesn't cut it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because you're not challenging your ability to overcome that resistance. You're challenging your ability to keep moving. It's an aerobic or a metabolic challenge. Not challenging the resistance that it's creating.
Okay, so then we could go over some classic examples, and I guess let's try and do like maybe both ends of the spectrum. So like when we're talking about resistance training, a goblet squat or a bicep curl, because you're less weight, or less total volume than something like what we just described, but you're having to overcome the load. And if you were a male and you're fairly strong and you curled 35 pounds in one arm, like, you will probably have to stop. within, 10 to 20 reps. You're not going to indefinitely do that. You're not going to be able to keep doing that without having the stimulus of your muscle stopping and saying like, we can't do this anymore. So like that would be resistance training.
Correct. And which I know it's likely one of the points that you want to chat on. If you don't put enough resistance in there, then to be able to create that dose, you need to be willing to do 3, 5, 10x the amount of reps to actually take yourself to that point. But it feels the same, right? Like a lot of people are thinking like, oh, I don't want to be grinding against a heavy weight. Well, for it to have an effect, you're either going to grind against the 3rd rep or against the 30th rep. But it needs to feel grindy at some point. That's the challenge. That is the dose.
Okay. All right. So then what are some things that would not be an example? Like, so some people, and I won't say like we'll think for them, but like, is rowing on a rowing machine resistance training, or, is a stair climber resistance training?
I think there's aspects to those modalities that require overcoming resistance, but they are not the ideal tools to use as a means of resistance training. The stair climber may be a little bit more than the row. I could argue that, if we put that damper on the rower at 10 and you did arm only rows, that will get you closer to more of a resistance training dose. But overall, like those wouldn't be ideal to develop strength or to consider it a resistance training program. Instead, if you're thinking of a rower, then I would say you squat and you combine that with dumbbell rows, right? Knee flexion and upper body pulling. If you were going to do a Stairmaster and you want it similar pattern, but to get the resistance training dose, then you would do step-ups or lunges or walking upstairs with a 30-pound backpack, for example.
Yeah. So it's, like if we were to classify and be nitty gritty, or to say like what we would be giving someone as resistance training, those really wouldn't be there, but possibly like you only have a Stairmaster machine at your gym and there's not much to do, and you could make it work, maybe carry something a little heavier, do it for a minute at a time, or but overall that's not what we're looking for, and it's probably again not the most efficient way to get the dose that we're looking for.
I mean that will do on a particular day or over the course of several weeks, or depending where you're at as far as training age. But to basically be blunt on it, because like I've trained remote clients who want to work out at home, and they have a bike and they have 5, 10, 15, and 20-pound dumbbells and the bands, and yes, we can do something with it. But honestly, either invest in gear or you need to sign up at a gym. Like it's just not going to cut it. In the long term, and for what we want to consider, you will not be able to create enough tension unless there is enough loading. There's no way to get through that. You can practice several techniques to get closer to it. Increasing range of motion, slowing down tempos, but that will take you only so far. Eventually, you will need to put more tension to add more load.
Okay. All right. So people have a pretty good idea of what we're talking about: resistance training, overcoming a resistance, overcoming an external load. You can think weight training, strength training, cable machines, but what I think we should go into next is why should people be focusing on resistance training as you age? We're fitness over 40. What's the main reason? Because we touched on this in the last episode, that really resistance training, like a great program for someone could be all resistance training and walking, or light aerobic activities. And I put 3 things down why I thought they would be great. And then I'll let you kind of extrapolate, or maybe say if someone were to ask you the question, what would they be? But I put lean mass preservation. It's a great way to preserve lean mass. There's higher energy expenditure versus you just, maybe doing an intense workout or just maybe a 20-minute run. And you could work on, if it's written correctly, you could work on things simultaneously like mobility, flexibility, even like a cardiovascular or aerobic, stimulus if you're setting up the workout correctly, but still the major focus being resistance training. Which I think are three of the main reasons people over 40 are even working out, period, is, to hold on to muscle, to feel good, and to, burn calories and expend energy. Maybe they need to, or they want to. But if a client came to you and was like, hey, why should I even care about resistance training? I think I should just be running, stretching, and maybe doing one intense workout a week. What would you say? Like, how would you start to sculpt that conversation to this is why?
Yeah, I mean, first off, all of those things that you mentioned apply to anyone at any age. Like those are going to be benefits of resistance training, period, not with a caveat or the asterisk of, past a certain age. Coincidentally, I posted a reel just today kind of about that, where I said, there's a lot of iterations and versions of fitness. And, in this case, I don't care if you're doing ID, group, yoga, spinning, aerobics, like I don't care. Do all those. If your goal is general well-being, vitality, and overall health, and resistance training is not the centerpiece of that program, it is a flawed program. I don't care how renowned the coach that wrote it is, and don't send me like a 1 week training split of a famous coach with a mobility routine, because like that's 1 week, the 1 week screenshot. Nobody will argue with that point, right? We need strength training, and we need to move slowly as the two main things that should be in any program that is conducive to health. Now, as we start to get older, then the things that you mentioned we are more exposed to them, right? You mentioned preservation of lean mass. Why is that important? Because sarcopenia starts, like we said in the last episode, at around age 30, and it gets exponentially faster after age 60. That is the process by which you start losing muscle wasting, whatever else you want to call it. But also, most age-related decline in physical capabilities will happen in strength, flexibility, postural endurance, or muscle endurance, and balance. Those are the things that make us look and feel old when it comes to physical expression. And those are all things that can be, I don't want to say fixed, but addressed via strength training, in the sense of the stronger you are and the more you expose yourself to these challenges, the less of an effect it's going to have on these characteristics. So unfortunately, a lot of people will just use aging as an excuse, right? It's like, well, I'm getting weaker, but I'm not getting any younger, and I used to be able to touch my toes, and now I can't touch my knees, and we just laugh about it and we make a joke and like, it's something, we throw our hands in the air and it's gonna happen. Well, I just can't buy into that, because yes, there will be actual physical deterioration, but the speed of that decline is 100% a behavioral issue, because we're not exposing ourselves to those physical challenges. You cannot not touch your toes for 10 years and then try to touch them one day.
Yeah.
Right? You can't not try to ever sit below parallel and then try to do it 10 years later. Right? If you were able to sit below parallel when you were 18, and barring an actual injury, if you go below parallel once a day, every day, from 18 to 60, I guarantee you will be able to go down below parallel, because you keep going in that range.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like that just makes it sounds obvious to me and logical.
Mhm.
But that is the problem right there when we go into these, phases in our lives where we have excuses that we accept individually and socially, like, oh, I got married, I got a job, I got kids, so I was not able to do like work on my physical capabilities for 7 years. That is acceptable on a social level, but the effects of that, like you can't most people can't get over that when they
Mhm.
realize that, oh, this is an issue. And you may try to right the ship, and that's valid. It's never too late to start doing something, but the longer you wait, the more you squash that top end potential that you had. So you may regain some of it, but if you'd never stopped, you'd have a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, there's probably some skeptics out there still thinking, okay, like I can't lift something overhead right now, like a box, or I can't go below parallel. And how is resistance training going to help me? Because I can't even get there. And we're not saying that there's not other things you would be doing in your program, and maybe there is some mobility or some specific movements you need to start doing to gain the range of motion back, and that could be doing resistance training as well. But to enforce it, to gain strength in a new range of motion, the deeper you get, the more the more you're able to touch your toes. Someone could only be doing a 50-pound RDL, and that still could be challenging to them, especially as they age. So most people are, you said it like you have to overcome it and it needs to be difficult. Well, that's relative too, because some people probably were like, oh, I'm not going to max out. I can't do that anymore. And you didn't ask them to do that. But if they're not having a challenge, that, it's not going to change. So, kind of like what you just wrapped up with saying is, they've gone without challenge for so long, it won't just magically come back. Because there is probably a group of people that, like you said, 7 years, they just skipped. They just didn't do anything super hard. Or they maybe were just very inconsistent. And when they were consistent, it was not resistance training. So it could take a long time to do that. And just knowing you won't be what you were when you were 25 and now you're 35 doesn't mean it's chalked. Like you should just stop. You should probably still attempt to, make a change and resist it even longer, because when 45 comes around, it's just going to get worse and worse. And like you said, it only makes your quality of life worse as you're 60. And as we said in, episode 1, it's set the example. If you want to be 60 years old and still, setting the example for whatever it is, your children or your grandchildren, the generation, your employees, you're going to have to take it very seriously, and you might as well start now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it's never too late. If you don't have a lot of experience resistance training, it's likely that you can build muscle and get strong later in life, because there'll always be that point of newbie gains. If you are an experienced lifter, it's likely that you will never squat and bench what you did senior year in college. But whatever you have now, or whatever your potential is now, you can hold on to that for longer. So if at 50, you're as strong or almost as strong as you were at 45, now at 55, you'll be almost as strong or as strong as you were on 50. And you start carrying that over to where, and again, this is purely theoretical, but at some point in your life, you gained 5 years of functionality that you wouldn't have otherwise. And I just picked a number. That may be 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
That is a shit ton of quality of life that for the 30, 40, maybe even 50-year-old, it's still not sinking in. But ask the 72-year-old who needs to call you to help them scoot up from sitting on the toilet if they wouldn't like to be able to do that for another 12 years without assistance. And again, extreme example, but being able to pick up your grandkids and hold them up here and tickle them and do all that kind of stuff, be able to sit on the ground and open Christmas presents, Be the person that your spouse kind of calls on to open a jar, right?
Mhm.
Those are very simple things that they sound ridiculous right now, but when you're there, you start feeling like, man, how useless am I in this life right now when I can't do anything physical?
Yeah. Yeah, you reminded me of something. I've had a bunch of clients over 40, and they might be training for 6 months, or let's just say a year, and they're like, man, my squat was 185 a year ago, and it's still only 185 when I did this set of 3. And I'm like, I mean, you've gained a year of life, and you're over 40 years old. Like, this is great that you're still able to hit the same number. It's not about getting to 190 anymore. You preserved it. And same with a pull up, or like you're 3 years in and you're still doing the same weights. Like, these are actual PRs now, in my mind. So I think people get wrapped up in not gaining more when they don't realize you are gaining by just keeping it the same baseline.
Yeah, I think this is pretty natural, in the sense of human nature. At some point, we got old, and our brain didn't register it. So we're still thinking like, ooh, if I work hard at this, a few years down the line, like we're holding on to that train of thought. Um,
Mm-hmm.
at some point, that stops. It definitely does with when we're talking about physical capabilities. You may have gotten that far if you started when you were 20, but the longer you don't do anything, your ceiling starts coming down and down and down. So all that to say, 10 years of dedicated weight training and lifestyle and nutrition choices between 20 and 30 is completely different between 40 and 50. So we need to understand that. And like you said, at some point, we just need to be happy with not getting weaker and just holding on to whatever we had. Plus, there's a lot of things that we can look at that are huge wins inside of that if you're looking at the right things. For example, one thing that I've been doing over the past 3 years, for the most part, squatting without a belt. And there's times where I'm building, and I get to like 95% of a historical 1RM, no belt. And to me, that's a win. And that's strategic at a psychological level as well, because I don't want to attempt 100 and not have it be there. But I know that if I was able to do 95% with no belt, there's still something more there.
Yeah.
Maybe it's 2.5%, maybe it's 6%, and I had a PR, but that's good enough for me. I saved a little bit of CNS, readiness there, and I avoided a possible injury by not overreaching, and I'm happy because I know I had a little bit more left. So it may be that. It may be, pausing for a split second at the bottom of that squat at that 185. Like, if you hadn't paused, like maybe you have a little bit more, but you don't. Like, you keep those matches instead of burning them all the time like we did when we were young. You save your body, and you get close enough to where you can still see wins. Maybe you never attempt the 1RM again, but you are able to do 3 at that previous weight. And just leave it at that, man. Don't, unless we're competing, you don't really need to know what your 1RM is. I know that I squatted that one time, and now I'm happy doing that 3 times and not necessarily pushing myself over the limit. Because one of your topics was what puts people off from doing it, or what intimidates people. It's that. On the one hand is, it's a challenge. It's something difficult. If you showed me like a typical day in the life for Henry, and one that flows smoothly and is easy, and what one looks like when it's a shitty day, and you ask me, what would you like to have tomorrow? I want to have the smooth one. I will pick the smooth one every time. So would you like to do 10 repetitions at a real easy weight, or would you want to do one where you feel like it's crushing you and you're using every single ounce of strength inside of your body to push against. Like, some of us enjoy that in a sicko kind of way. But most people, it's like, well, I prefer to just do smooth reps than go through that. So that's one thing. But then also, we are, and understandably so, afraid of getting injured. And here you're thinking, like, I know I need to get strong. I know I need to be in good shape to be able to do all these other things that I do in my life. But man, if I can't go to the office for a week, or I can't pick up my kids from school because I was squatting too heavy, like, that's non-negotiable. And I understand that as well. And usually with my, wellness or vitality clients, it's part of my thought process as well, to where, to me as a coach, it's unacceptable that one of those clients hurts himself because I said, oh, it looks like you can go heavier. Like, so I'm very careful with when I push in those situations compared to a performance client, to where if you truly are here to compete and for sport, then you are willing to throw your back out to add a feather on that barbell. And that's completely different. These are things that are understandably concerns for a lot of people. And there are ways in which we can create buffers. And I mentioned a few of those examples, to where you still challenge yourself enough to get the right dose, hence the right dose response, but you minimize the risk of injury as much as possible. Then, having said that, you need to understand, and it's part of the iron game, if you are exercising long enough and the right way, you are going to get injured at some point, in some way, to some degree. Maybe you tweak a little something here, maybe it's something serious. Like, these things, like, inevitably they're going to happen. If you do it the right way and you put these, systems and buffers in place, then hopefully that's just like a little weird knee ache that popped up and it's gone in 3 days, and it's not something that will require surgery, for example. But again, I think that needs to be mentioned, in the sense of, like, you could get injured. Yes, you could. Like, you can die the next time you get in your car and drive somewhere. However, we negotiate those risks.
Yeah. It reminds me of something that Sam posted too. Another coach at Proof 3. He said, like, one of his greatest tips for anyone, performing in the gym, athlete or not, is leave a little weight on the bar, like, or I get off the bar. Leave some room for either progression or for safety, or so that you can perform it better. There's a lot of reasons why, which doesn't mean do 80%. Like you said, like, you did 95%. Without the belt, and that felt like a huge win. And a lot of people may not really understand that one, especially as experience goes up. Hitting 95% without the belt and feeling pretty good about it is pretty huge. It's a good feeling, though. When that's confidence, being able to do that.
Absolutely. So there's, again, that's kind of like I call it like the game within the game. Little things that you create for yourself to kind of, and on the one hand, entertain yourself and keep you engaged, and ways to just create excitement for yourself. Nobody needs to know what these things are if you don't want to tell them. But truth of the matter is, if you're going to be in the gym for long enough and you're truly going to make it a part of your life, you will not get like this high sense of arousal from working out. That is literally that's 5 times a year for me, where I'm like so pumped to hit this workout. The rest of the time, it's like, I'm going to work out. Okay. Go out, take my creatine, go outside, put weight on the bar, squat it, move on, go on with the rest of my day. That's how it works. So if you're expecting to be super pumped about working out, that's at the very beginning, and you need to be okay with things just being met for the most part. So how can you make a meh session like, ooh, that was pretty cool? Then you need to figure out these little things inside of that to kind of look towards and appreciate when they're happening and view them as wins.
Yeah. Okay. So recap. Why should you be focusing on the resistance training? Lean mass preservation was a good one. It's going to help you the most with that out of any form of training in the gym. Then we have higher energy expenditure. We're going to expend a lot of calories. It's going to take a lot of energy to do that in the amount of time that you would spend doing something else for the most part or safely. And then you can work on multiple things simultaneously. Like we said, you can still have a good aerobic stimulus from it. You could get a lot of mobility and flexibility training out of it. And all these things are important. And kind of segues into some of the stuff you had mentioned. And these are common myths. So the first one, anytime I think of resistance training, or 90% of the time when someone's asking me about this and they're not, well-versed, or they're not in the gym a lot or not into fitness, they'll say, I don't want to do that. I do not. Well, females, I do not want to be bulky. I don't want to get huge, which to me makes me laugh. And it's funny now because even my wife now, after, years of training and figuring it out, and, we've been together for a while, she's had a coach this whole time now, and she laughs at it now, which makes me proud. She's just like, are you kidding me? So what do you think when people will say that, like, hey, probably not going to do the squats or the curls because I'm not looking to get bulky?
Yeah, and it's funny because the girls will say, I don't want to do it because I don't want to get bulky. You'd be surprised at how many guys say, I can't do that because every time I try it, I just get huge. And obviously, nobody huge has ever said this to me, right? But yeah, I don't know what else to say other than just say, call bullshit on it. Start from scratch. You will build some amount of size because that is the mechanism for building muscle. This is what happens when you resistance train. You break down the muscle that you had. It needs to be repaired. It causes inflammation, hence water retention, and from the get-go, it poofs a little bit. From there on out, you make a small amount of actual lean mass as it can be measured and weighed scientifically. And after some years of experience, good luck trying to put on 1/4 pound of lean mass. It doesn't happen. You just kind of hold on to that. When that has gone into studies, the actual hypertrophy, again, measured by the amount of lean mass weight, is negligible. It has like 8 zeros after the decimal for weight. What changes is the way the muscle looks. So the muscle gets pumps, it looks a little more swollen here and there, but there's the same amount of muscle that there was before. Right? So the vast majority of times when your clothes aren't fitting and when you look swollen as a whole is because you have a lot of fat on top of that muscle. And you've kept on gaining fat as you're putting on muscle. It's not because the weights have done this to you. And again, I'm referring to what you can do naturally. So when I get a 35-year-old that comes like, oh, I want to put on like 15 pounds of lean mass. And I'm like, well, you don't need me. You need like a drug program, which I'm not going to offer. But I don't see how a 30-year-old puts on 10, 15 pounds of mass naturally. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah. It would have to be a very specific case of someone who's been under eating for years and never weight trained, and then all of a sudden wants to work extremely hard, eat a whole lot, and somewhere in there probably be genetically gifted to do that, which now we're talking about 5 people.
There's a funny meme that I've come across several times in the gram, and it says, like, saying that you don't want to lift weights because you're going to get too bulky is like saying you don't want to drive your car because you're going to become a NASCAR driver.
Yeah. The other one, I always think of that one, and the one, it was like Arnold. Someone said like girls who lift look like men, and then he said, "Well, your husband who doesn't lift looks like a girl." Then,
Yeah.
and it's pretty funny. But yeah, it's like you don't want to get bulky. It's like if for you to get bulky, you're gonna have to work extremely hard, and your aim will have to be to get bulky. And a lot of people just shift, after doing it and understanding. Most of the time, I'm not an expert, but most of the time, a lot of the issues are already like insecurities or kind of like what people think their image looks like. And they're thinking of like the worst case scenario. What will happen to me? What I would look like? I'll look like a man. And don't understand like how much better you would feel and likely look just by adding the resistance training.
Mhm.
And like we said, you'd have to work really hard to get quote unquote bulky, like to put on so much mass that you think you don't look good is going to take some serious eating and some serious work. So
Yeah. Plus genetics.
Yeah.
It's too overlooked, right? And we can take it to an extreme. But you mentioned Arnold. Anybody who you've ever seen on the stage for Mr. Olympia, if like backtrack to whenever they started and have me do exactly what they did and take the exact same drugs, and I wouldn't be on that stage.
Yeah.
There is like genetics has a lot to do with the ability of that body to do what it did under those circumstances. So even then, we're talking an extremely small. I think you're more likely to play in the NBA than get on stage at Mr. Olympia. So
yeah, someone would have to tell you when you're not really working out seriously and not on drugs. Someone would have to be like, you should bodybuild. Like you should already have that kind of physique looking, and people will be like, dude, you kind of have like little globes on your shoulders, like your delts are huge, or whatever it is. So yeah, there's a myth busted. If you're not going to get bulky, it's still we're still saying it's the best thing you should be doing. Next is like if I'm not aerobic training, if it's not a priority for me, I won't be healthy. Like if I'm not running, I'm not healthy. If I'm not biking for 60 minutes, if I'm just doing resistance training, I'm going to have a bad heart. And, I'm going to lose flexibility or mobility. That's another thing I hear. And it's just not well balanced. So that's what people are coming to me saying, or I'm hearing people saying. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, again, well, probably all of these examples, my first reaction will be bullshit. But in the mobility perspective, it comes from the train of thought that when the muscles get bigger, you get tight and you're not able to find mobility. For the most part, that just doesn't happen. If you want to be able to squat below parallel, you squat below parallel repetitive times. So who actually, for the most part, who sucks at squatting below parallel without an excessive lean forward? Runners, because they're never going down there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Who can do that properly? People who squat, who go to the gym and do 3 sets of 12 squats to that position, twice a week, amongst other things. So you need to expose yourself to ranges of motion if you want to keep enjoying them, if you will, and being able to get there. The other aspect that's where it came from the whole heart health thing, to where, well, you need to train your heart to get healthy. And that is factual, as in if you run, cycle, swim, whatever aerobic activity that is, and you do that progressively and you keep at it and consistently, you will have a healthier heart and a healthier aerobic system. That is factual. But what you actually need from those exercises to be healthy and not way above average in a performance perspective is really just movement, and walking will do it. So if we're talking about health, well-being, vitality, walking 30 minutes a day versus running 10 miles a day, you're not going to get that much, if anything, benefit over just the walking.
Yeah. In terms of living long and having a good life.
Yeah. If anything, your knees will break down a little bit faster. So will your back, because there's a lot of pounding and whatnot. So yeah, all you need to do really to have a healthy heart is move, count your steps. I don't even know what's recommended these days for steps. Is it 10,000 a day?
I think it's like 7,000.
There you go. So that, or just go out and walk for 30 minutes. And that is something that you can slap on to any other training program imaginable. You can do that on top of whatever else you're doing for training, and it will benefit you or will cause zero interference. And hit the weights 3 times a week. Ideally, 2 times a week would work as well. That's really what you need.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when people think about the resistance training too, they might not really realize that, like, range of motion is important. They might think I'm getting not necessarily the runner, but like someone else that's like, I just do these cable machines and I just do these, certain movements, and I'm not working on flexibility. And they're not realizing, which comes back to having a good program or a good coach or a good understanding. Like, you squatting to your best depth while holding a good position is important, or doing a dumbbell bench press and getting deep on the rep and not going to 90 degrees. Like there are stipulations to what we're talking about. Someone could do it incorrectly and do it poorly and not reap the benefits that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, things need to be put in perspective. Being mobile and having good flexibility is not being able to turn yourself into a pretzel. Like, that's, again, in the extreme of people who would be able to do that regardless of what they did for exercising. I consider myself to be of poor mobility and poor flexibility inside the context of what I consider to be good in the things that I do and whatnot. And I can still break parallel with the perfect squat position, and I can stoop and I can touch the ground with the tips of my fingers, which in the grand scheme of things is way above average mobility. Right? When I show you my scratch test and I can barely touch the bottom of my neck, that's a pass. This is shit mobility. Like, there's people that this is as far as they can go. Right? So don't tell me that being able to bench 300 pounds has impacted my mobility. I would have never been able to get past that in my life. That's as far as I reached even when I was a kid. That's how I was put together. So, it may sound completely logical to people as they say it. It blows my mind, having some knowledge in the field to how wrong that is.
Yeah. Okay. So final myth or resistance to resistance training. People say it's too hard or it's too complex. And I'm not saying that it is going to be hard. I'm sorry, but it's too hard as in, like, I can't learn this. I can't do this. I don't know what to do. Like, there's too many hurdles. People really think that. And I think I know what you're going to say, but I think because you talked about it before and your answers have been pretty consistent here, is that, like, those are excuses. Like we talked about how simple it can be. And we're going to get into that next too, is how super simple it can be. But this is just an excuse. This is not like that's way too hard. I should just stick to my runs, or I should just stick to what I know.
Yeah. I actually think there's some validity to that, in the sense of just considering how much of that is ignorance. And I don't mean that being judgmental by any means, or just lack of knowledge. How lack of knowledge plays into that. First, it is not complex, because, and if it is complex, well, then I'm sorry, you were born in the wrong what do you call this? Like you were born being the wrong animal, because if you cannot squat, stoop, push, pull, and lunge, you cannot be human. Because every time you take a step forward, that is lunge pattern, right? I mean, every time you push yourself out of bed, that is a push pattern. Every time you pick up the groceries, that is pulling. Every time you sit on the toilet or on a chair and stand up, that is squatting. So you're doing these things. It's basically, training yourself to be better and to be able to continue to do this forever without assistance. So you cannot tell me that it is too complex. Now, this is where I'm saying, lack of knowledge or ignorance comes into play, because if to you strength training is a squat snatch, that's complex.
Mm-hmm.
And in the scheme of what it takes to make that happen. But you do not need to be doing that. You need to be squatting, stooping, pushing, pulling, and lunging. And those, and with different perturbations, but those can be incredibly simple. So the entire problem that you're facing is that you don't know how to do it. And for some reason, fitness professionals have never been credited enough for what they know inside of that. Because being human, we need to know how to squat, push, pull, etc., etc. And people are like, I should be able to do this by myself. But that's not the reality. There are people like you and me who have dedicated and made careers out of teaching these concepts and teaching people how to move around in the gym and how to take, how to handle their fitness. So when I hear that it's too hard, it's too complex. It's just, I don't know how to do it. I don't know where to start. And all you need to do is go to someone or somewhere that can help you do that. And I would 100% say, yeah, call me, come to Proof 3, absolutely. But outside of putting that plug in, like one system, or it's as simple as saying there's good coaches and there's bad coaches. Amongst the good ones, the incredibly good ones versus the good ones, again, there's not that much of a separation. From a coach who's good and is using, the right principles and putting together the right program and looking at the individual and giving them what they need, just make sure that you're picking a good one and not a poor one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's as simple as that. If you're looking for it not to be hard, you will never be fit in your life. I don't care what modality of exercise you end up choosing. Even if you don't take my advice and don't weight train, if you're doing something because it feels easy, you are not getting fit. You get fit by overcoming a challenge and adapting to that. So if there is 0 degree of difficulty, you will not get fit.
Okay. So it has to be hard. Doesn't have to be complex. Okay. We kind of talked about this.
Sorry, Roman. I would prefer to say it needs to be challenging.
Okay. Yeah. Challenging.
Yeah.
Okay. Challenging, not complex. So where to start is kind of the next portion we're going to kind of wrap up with, which is what we talked about a lot. And the first note I made was it can be very simple, and more complexity doesn't mean it's better. Because like you said, it doesn't have to be complex. As you get better, as you get more experienced, maybe you want to add more complexity, to add more flavor, to add more, to add more enjoyability maybe, but you don't have to. If you just wanted a goblet squat literally every Monday for the rest of your life, it could work. It would be, that might start making it actually hard to do that every Monday for the next 20 years, but it can be done. It does not have to be super hard. It doesn't have to be some daunting task of I don't know how to do any of these movements. Cause like you said, you're human. You can do these things, and you likely do a lot of them every day. So, and another thing you already noted on in the first 5 minutes, slow movement, slow is good. It can be lighter weight. You don't have to throw up, some huge dumbbells, and you can always make something more challenging by slowing it down and adding a tempo. Focus on quality and learning was one thing I said, or one thing I noted is just focus on doing things correctly, and the challenge will come. if you can do it right, you can add challenge. That's easy. And then I was thinking of some examples that you might have of, okay, someone came to you, and you might not work with a ton of clients like this, but I'm sure you have. I know you have. Someone came to you, they have little to no experience. Like, they've been to the gym maybe in school. They've never been to the gym. They're 35 and they're like, what would I be doing right now? So what are some resistance that you would be giving them in those early stages?
Yeah, so I'm just gonna keep saying the same kind of things, but it's that important. I will assess where that individual is at. That will include seeing them move and taking into consideration what they have told me. And with that, I put together that program. I want to see them squat. I want to see them bend or stoop in some iteration. I want to see them push and pull with their upper body. And I want to see them lunge. That's what I'm striving for. We can add core to being the 6th movement pattern. Mm-hmm. I feel like I can address that well through the other 5 patterns and not necessarily need to prescribe directly for that. Some coaches could argue with that, and that's fair, but this is just my approach. And then if there are any restrictions for any of those patterns, I want to teach you how to move and how to perform all those patterns with nothing but your body. An air squat, unloaded lunge, maybe a push-up, maybe it's just a plank hold. And for pulling, maybe it's a pull-up, maybe it's hanging from the bar. Mm-hmm. It'd be as simple as that. Once I've taught you how to move, we'll start challenging that via different perturbations or different challenges, or in the term that you've been using is complexity. We will add just enough complexity to that. You said for somebody who's new, they shouldn't be doing something that they have no idea what they're doing. For anybody, if mm-hmm. I don't care how much experience you have, if you're going to the gym and you're like, I have no idea what I need to do today, that is not the right training for you.
Yeah,
you shouldn't be doing that, right? So bring me hey, it can be a bodybuilder, and you're going to tell him, tomorrow, come to the gym, you're going to snatch. He shouldn't be doing that. He shouldn't. We should be doing, those dudes have never even done overhead squat, most of them. Can you even get, so for them, they're a beginner in that movement.
Yeah.
So if you know how to air squat and you know how to perform a unloaded lunge, I may say, tomorrow, I want you to do a goblet squat or a goblet lunge. And you can go real light, and you're going to say, I have no idea how to do that. I've never done it. And I'm going to show you one. And you're going to say, I know how to grab a dumbbell here, and I know how to squat. I'm pretty certain that I can grab a dumbbell and squat.
Mm-hmm.
So that is as much challenge as we're going to give you there. And then from there, maybe you do a single arm front rack squat. I have no idea what that is. Okay, I'm going to show you. You grab the dumbbell and put it on your one shoulder and you squat. And I've never done that, but if I can do it with a dumbbell here, I'm pretty sure I can do it with a dumbbell, so forth and so on, until we continue adding, we can call it complexity, but it's really perturbations. It's the way in which we impose that challenge to where there's just enough novelty, but the bulk of it is familiar.
Still a squat.
It's still a squat. It's still a squat. Quite differently in how you need to strategize to perform the movement, where you need to brace and whatnot. And granted, somebody may be perfect in a goblet and then do something weird when it's offset because they can't quite figure out that off balance. And we may then say, okay, there's no single arm front rack dumbbell squat. We're going to do 2 at a time. Does that fix it? Yeah. How can we then help you understand and overcome that one-sided off-balance challenge? And again, there may be strategies for that, like side planks, single arm carries and whatnot to make that happen. But it may be a case to where if you're 78, that I just tear that page out of my playbook. At this point in your life, I just want you to squat. So if we need to do goblet forever, we do goblet forever. And the 3 that you can do that keep you moving and keep you moving well and reduce the risk of injury, and don't blow your mind with perceived complexity.
Okay. Yeah. So basically anyone can do it, There is a starting point for everyone. If you are really that nervous, maybe it is in your best interest to hire a coach. Maybe if you're not nervous at all, it's still in your best interest to hire a coach. And like Henry said, he would tell you what to do, because say you were working with Henry, you have an app, you open it up, it tells you what to do. He's going to give you some personable notes and might say on that single arm squat, like grip the dumbbell tight. Make sure, if you're really new, he might say, make sure to, focus on your breathing or push your knees out. If you are really good and you don't know what, you already know that, he's probably not going to put that. He's going to have a demo video in there showing you what to do, because like he said, he's going to show you. He's not going to call you and tell you, but you'll see it. You got to be a little self-sufficient, and you'll learn, and you'll maybe film a video and send it to him, and he'll say, great work, or this is what I would change next time. So there's some communication there, and then that's how you learn, and you're just going to get slowly better. And it doesn't have to get too much more complex, but he's going to, like he said, add those little things that are going to make it a little different, challenge you a little bit more. And that's what it is. It's just these small challenges over time. You're going to challenge a little bit more the better you get. But it's not hard. It needs to be challenging, but it's not hard. Anyone can do it. And this is a big reason why we believe in resistance training again. So that was our little plug too into our coaching. We do work with people, and we have both worked with people that are probably not even at 0. They're probably at like -1. And if you're like, I'm this specific case, we have a lot of coaches that can probably help you in your specific case. If you need help in a lot of different areas. But I think we did a pretty good job of wrapping up and giving a good summary of why we think and believe resistance training is number one. If you still don't believe us, you can just hit us up with a question, because I'd love to see why you think otherwise, and I'm sure Henry would too. And then maybe we'll just do a part 2 on your question. But I think most people will get a lot out of this episode. If you've made it this far, we would love for you to share it. Maybe send it to some people that don't believe in the resistance training quite yet, or maybe you think they need it. Future episodes, we got some more in the I've got some more ideas for some, but if you guys want to hear something, we would love to hear it. Any closing thoughts for everybody?
Yeah, I'd say lift weights to build as much strength and muscle as you can while you can. And if you don't want to do that, still lift weights at the very least so you don't weaken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's simple. Just, carry some stuff, squat some stuff, push some stuff. It's simple. You will not regret it. And don't weaken. You don't want to be weak. There's no reason. There's no scenario where someone's like, wow, I wish I had, you hadn't lifted weights, and you'd be a better fit for X. So you'll be a better human for it, and you'll really enjoy it, and you'll probably learn a lot, not just physically. But yes, thank you everyone again for listening. If you need us, you can shoot us a message. You can send us a comment. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook, and you can ask us a question. But thanks again, and we will see you guys next week.